deep, very serious.
Hi everyone. I am totally pleased to have Chus with us. I've just met her and I've already fallen in love. In the first 2 minutes she told me almost everything and I feel as if I'm... But it was very essential and very important. She told me, no, I'm not going to say it. So it's a pleasure. We've had an amazing year of really fantastic talks, this colloquium. So this is part of it. And welcome to Jerusalem and Btzalel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I will give the official. I can't give Chus Martinez to read her bio. It would take the hour and a half that we have.
And they have Wikipedia.
And you have Wikipedia and you don't need it. But I will start from the point that I met Chus.
Yeah.
And I met her when she was chief curator at the MACBA. This was one of her positions. And later, she was the head of the agents of the Documenta 13, which was the last Documenta with Carol and Christophe Bakegeer. It was an amazing Documenta, in my opinion. And we teach it here all the time. And then Chus, she's doing things many times the first time. So she's like a pave maker. And one of the things that she did is she curated the Catalan pavilion at the last Venice Biennale. And so that was the first time. And now she's the head of an Academy of Art and Design, ב-FHNW. And she will say the whole, I won't say it in the German, the whole thing. And we are fascinated from all Chus Martinez's facets, and we are very, very honored and glad that she came to be with us. Thank you very much.
So I need to use the microphone. I feel like,
yes,
I love it. So I need to stand up. So there is genetic reasons for that. You will understand. So I can't really, if I sit, you don't see me, and that's a bad thing. So as Nirit was saying, I was the head of the curatorial office with Caroline Christoph, Bakargiev, artistic director of Documenta, and actually I was co-curating it with her, but she did not want to call it co-curating, and I think that this is great, not to call it co-curating. She's the artistic director and she should remain the artistic director. So I was somehow like at her side, and I never enjoy a position so much as being at the side of somebody like Caroline. So she came one day when I was working at the MACBA, and then I was the chief curator, and that was something that really made happy some people, like my father, for example, because I was having a museum position, the contract was kind of for life, or if they fire me, then it's difficult. I am from Spain, my parents are from the north of Spain, Barcelona is not the north of Spain, but I was raised there, so for many reasons that was ideal, and I really hated it. So, probably because of that. So I received a call one day saying, I saw an exhibition of you, and you know what happened to me? You know who I am? I was like, no, I don't know who I am. Who is calling? My name is Caroline Christoph, and actually, I saw this exhibition of yours, and I got appointed yesterday, director of the next Documenta. Do you want to work with me? And I said, of course. Because if something like that happened to you, you say, of course. And then you just, and they say, of course, of course, of course. And it's like, okay, then I'm coming, and I hang up the phone. And then she came. So she came to the office and said, okay, you are leaving the museum now. But we never met before. And then I said, but this sounds really interesting. Why shouldn't I don't leave the museum now? So she went to the office of my boss, the director of the museum, that should also have left the museum at that time, because as you know, like, he created a massive scandal later on, Bartomeu Marie. And then she went as my mother, kind of, and said, the girl needs to leave. Because I am not like in Germany, I'm Italian, And I don't really like it, and she speaks German, so I want to send her to Kassel. It's unfortunate for you, but she needs to follow me. And I was sitting next to this woman thinking, this is just not of this planet. So I accepted that position, and from the very moment that we started working together, she posed a question. Chus, what are you going to do after Documenta? But Documenta did not even start. And I said, I don't know, but I want to go to Switzerland. And then she said, nah, don't joke with me, come on. Where do you want to go after Documenta? You probably want to go somewhere amazing. Do you have something in mind? Why don't you just start to be strategic, Chus, and think about what do you want to do after? So I want to go to Switzerland. And then Caroline was completely annoyed. So it turned into a joke, and every 3-4 months she asked, but Chus, after Documenta, Switzerland. I told you. And I said, but there's absolutely no reason why you should go there. And I said, that's where I want to go. But I have a reason, but I'm not going to tell you. Because that's exactly what happens after Documenta. So we started to work together, and something that she did that annoyed me kind of marked what I'm doing today. So Caroline was obsessive about many things, and one of the things she was obsessive about was Donna Haraway. I studied philosophy. And when I studied philosophy, Donna Haraway was the person that was not in the curriculum. So some people started reading Donna Haraway, but every time that we went into a seminar about Kant or about Hegel or about anything else, and I asked my German teachers about Donna Haraway, they say, yes, Donna Haraway is not a philosopher. But it's okay that you read this kind of stuff, it's nice, it's interesting, but definitely it's not philosophy. So when I met Caroline, Caroline said, we need to Skype with Donna, which is in North California, and then we need to base everything we do on her ideas. And then I thought, but why should we do that? And then she said, I have also no idea, but the first thing I did is I bought a dog. And the dog is also going to be one of the curators of Documenta. And then, like following what the dog feels, we are going to feel what we should do in Documenta. What do you think about that? And I thought, this is bullshit. What I think about that is the next thing is that they're going to declare that you have some hormonal problem. And nobody's going to take us seriously. So it started like a joke, but of course, it really looked like we both were completely out of our mind. Her, that she bought a dog, like in an opportunistic turn, to just be able to Skype with Donna Haraway, who has a dog for always, even wrote a book about the dog. And then I suppose that if you Skype with Donna Haraway, at that time, not super famous like today, and then Donna is with a dog and you are without a dog, then there is a problem of do you have an animal? And then you would say, no, but it's better if you have an animal. So we had an animal at the office to Skype with Donna Haraway. The animal stayed. And the animal stayed, and then we started these kind of ideas of just every time that I was thinking about how to span the borders of an institution, and Karen was said, like, ask the dog. And then I started kind of thinking that I should ask the dog, and start kind of going into a complete different path. So I explained that because after it all happened, and we opened the exhibition, Caroline asked again, where do you want to go? And I said, to Switzerland. And then she said, but I found a job for you. And then, through somebody, she put me in touch with Museo del Barrio, which is the only museum of Latino culture in the United States. And I ended up being the chief curator of that museum after Documenta. So I explained that because this really was an amazing experience for me. Amazing meaning really bad. One moment. Is that me? What? It's moving very slowly. We don't see an image. Okay. Do we know why? No. No, but it's also that it's not charging the PowerPoint. No, it's not working. Anyhow. Well, but I explained you. Museo del Barrio was a museum that was founded in 60 1967 by an artist called Rafael Montañez Ortiz. This guy, which is one of the big persons of the so-called destruction movement, like MACBA, was kind of asked by parents in a public school in New York to produce some sort of exercise in order to make them connect with their roots. So the parents of that Bronx school were mostly, all of them, from Puerto Rican and Dominican origins. It's not, we lost the image. This happens, this is totally... One moment. Oh, oh. Yeah, it only happens like that. Perhaps we only see it like that. Okay. But you see that image, but it's not really exciting. Well, there is no good lecture without a technical mistake. So this guy was asked for the parents, like, to produce, as I said, to produce experiments in order to make these kids reconnect with the roots and reconnect with the origin of them, which they were Latino, so they were Spanish speakers, but they were raised in an American public school, and they were raised in conditions that were completely different from the conditions in which their own parents were raised. So Rafael, that was an artist at the moment, but also was working in a public school as a teacher, came to the idea that in the middle of the aula, in the middle of the school, he should produce a museum. So he invented a museum called El Museo del Barrio that was actually operative and operating from an aula in a public school. So the museum was created in '67, and it was imagined as a museum for the kids, in order to reconnect with the roots and to kind of give them an institution. So little by little, that kind of, students, but also other teacher, artists were producing exhibitions in that context, and little by little, they gained some attention from the authorities. And 2 years later, in '69, the museum moved to the current location, first to a fire station, which is at the back of where it's now, in 110th. And no idea. That doesn't matter. I will do it later. So they moved to a normal location, and by the time that they were constituted as a real museum, not as an invocative museum or an exercise, a group of the people working with Rafael Montañez gave some sort of a coup and took the museum out of his hands, and the museum became a real museum. So it came from the idea of being an imaginary museum to being a real museum, and by the time that it was a real museum, the founder artist was kind of put by side. So when I arrived in New York, and I was the chief curator of that space, first of all, I did not understand anything. The first thing that I did not understand, because I'm from a context where it's difficult to understand, is that it's actually not a museum for Latin American art, even if in the collection there is at least 3,000 pieces from Latin American artists. It's not a museum for Latin American art because it's a museum for Latino people. It's a museum for the second generation immigration from the Caribbean into the United States. So when I said I want to do exhibitions by Latin American artists, what they said is that you are suspicious of being another modernist. That from the side of the artists. From the side of the board, they were saying, we only want things like Frida Kahlo that would attract the idea of the true Latino kind of cliche into the museum. So I had this kind of temperament, and it was absolutely impossible to figure out what is exactly the difference in between being Latin American, from Latin America, being Latino, and being born in the United States. So you are an American. So for me, I was like facing American people, that they have a different origin than perhaps other American people, but they were all Americans. But for them, they were Americans, but they were Latinos. And they did not want to relate to Latin America, but they saw that in direct opposition from what it means to be Latino and Latin American. So I was kind of confused over 3-4 months, and I decided that I should go and meet with Rafael. So Rafael, who is still alive, is 94, teaching at Rutgers, not anymore, an amazing artist. Through somebody in the board, I managed to get the contact. I wrote a letter. saying, I'm Chus Martinez, I'm now the chief curator of your museum, can we meet? And then he said, yeah, please come, you know, that time, that hour, my house. And then I came, and then I knocked at the door, and then he just opened the door and said, Chus, I was waiting for you. It took you so long to come. I was like, yeah, I've been there for 3 months. And it's like, it's really too long. Can you sit down? And then I sat down, and then he said, you know what? You are not going to manage. And then I was like, thank you for the trust. And then he said, like, no, it's impossible. You are never going to manage. You don't understand at all what's going on. And then I said, what is the point that I'm not understanding? And he said, you're not understanding that in order to manage a museum that is not kind of based on the same origin than a museum of modern art, whose DNA is really not the DNA of a storage or the DNA of a place which is based on walls and it's based on protecting, but it's actually based on something else, how to manage a program on top of it. And I don't think myself it's manageable, because I was giving myself one norm. This museum is only going to work if in the first gallery there is or exists the possibility of a rainforest being placed there. So I was kind of looking at him and asking what did he mean by that. And then I asked him, but what do you mean by a rainforest? And he said, you know, the thing is that museums of modern art are based on conditions of modernity, and there is like certain institutional conditions that they have been stable for centuries in a certain place of the planet, that they don't take into account certain parameters, like for example race. And if you come from the Caribbean, where race is a fundamental thing, it is fundamental to understand race. And the white cube does not understand race. The white cube actually kind of comes from a material. That is the material of storage, is the material of preventing, is the material of keeping objects coming from the colonies and being stored and then presented and being ordered and being classified. But the ways that we need to actually act in a museum that is of a different nature need to be also different too. So we kind of need to challenge or to change the DNA of those walls into something else. And the something else that it needs to change towards is the something else of a rainforest. He was actually using the rainforest because of Latin America, because of the Caribbean and so on, but he was also using it because of the scale and because of the nature of a rainforest, being the biggest biotop that we know and the biggest kind of organization of life. Putting the rainforest at the core of an institution or at the core of a thing like that is the same as negating it on the one hand, but also giving it the possibility of getting totally reinvented. So he said, since to put a rainforest at the beginning of a museum is impossible, it is impossible that you or anybody like you can call a museum on top of a DNA, on top of stem cells that are actually not meant to be that organ. So you want to operate with art and with artists that are actually from a context where modern art never existed as such, where the art schools were actually not operative. The difference in between the Caribbean and Latin America is that versus Latin America, the Caribbean did not have, apart from Cuba, any organized art schools till very, very late. I think the first one kind of appeared in the mid-50s in Cuba, but in República Dominicana or in the rest of the Caribbean, there was not such a thing as an academia or an art school. So the way that the collections and the artists were operating is something that we could call, like outside the art kind of substance. So he said, okay, this is not going to work, and I understood that he was kind of right. And I've been spending some time in trying to figure out what does he meant by this idea of putting a rainforest at the beginning of a white cube. So I left, and I left for what I wanted to do at the beginning, for Switzerland. So a delegation of people from Switzerland came, and then they asked me, like, are you actually happy in New York? And I said, no. And they said, well, because if you travel there tomorrow, there's a position open and you could apply. And I did that, and I applied. And I'm now at that school, which is new. It only opened as such 3 years ago. And this school is new and it's not new. It's actually a very interesting school for many reasons. And these reasons are kind of Caribbean reasons somehow, because I tend to think that Switzerland is the kind of European Caribbean. For reasons that the Swiss will never understand or agree with me. But the school existed since 40 years. and it's actually the former Applied Art School. So the Swiss never really had academies. The academies, as we know them historically, they were organized in the axis of France and Germany, and the Swiss never participated in that project. So if you know what an academy is, this is what we are not. So what the Swiss did have was an applied school, and these applied schools at the beginning of the 60s and 70s slightly started to turn towards what they call media schools, or schools that they were around classes of video and media art in the 70s and in the 80s. And they were kind of close to that idea of an art school, but they were not really academic art schools or academies. So 4 years ago, somebody called Maya Uri, which is the president of Schaulage, which is an immense collection of contemporary art, which is in one of the sites of Basel, decided that she wanted to ask the German-speaking university if they wanted to place their art school or art institute in the campus that she was building for her own art space. And they said yes, and with the help of another foundation, they started building up a campus that they call the Campus for the Arts. And then when they were kind of about to get ready, they discovered that actually they still were handling with a Angewandte, with applied arts, and that they wanted to just switch this applied art school into something that they call the Art Institute, because it's not, and they couldn't call it an art academy. So what's the difference? The difference is that since it's coming from an applied art tradition, and in Switzerland there is no other tradition, even if Zurich tried to do something else and trying to imitate more Anglo-Saxon models and not the French-German model of an academy, the Swiss model is based on the fact that since no authoritative conditions can be placed in the classroom, no person can teach alone. So like in the workshop, if you are teaching, wherever you are teaching, at least it needs to be 2 to 3 teachers being together in the same space. So differently from the Germans, for example, if you study with Rosemarie Trockel or with Hans Hacke, you are studying with one person and you are in the class of that person. But in Switzerland, you cannot do that. And you cannot do that because to the DNA of those structures, the idea of being facing an outstanding, excellent individual goes kind of against what they think is something that needs to be done. So for many years, if not centuries, the Germans and the French were completely looking down at the Swiss system for many reasons. One is that if you have a system like that, if 2 or 3 people are in the same classroom trying to agree on how to teach art, the possibilities of disagreement or strange consensus may completely harm quality. So mediocrity may be one of the major inputs or outputs of what's happening. And this was kind of happening. So while the Germans were putting excellent professionals in front of a class that you could follow, the Swiss were insisting in this kind of method, and then they were not producing, on the view of the German-speaking world, remarkable personalities. But the Swiss never wanted to produce this kind of remarkable possibilities or personalities. So why? And why did I went to Switzerland for that reason? So that was exactly the reason that I never explained why I wanted to go to Switzerland. I wanted to go to Switzerland because all through Documenta we have been experimenting with these ideas of coexistence, and the idea that later on Rafael Montañez Ortiz was naming when he was naming that you should put actually a rainforest at the beginning of the first gallery, which is the possibility of challenging not only the structures and not only the systems, but the very idea of the organisms that are interacting. So it's not about the non-human being a wall and the human being us. It also may be the non-human being a dog, or being an animal, being a plant, being a forest, being us, being the world. So the question is how to interact what Donna Haraway called the coexistence and the coevolution of this kind of multi-species coevolution. So during Documenta, of course, Caroline was addressing this, but I was not understanding it. Not that she was also understanding it. We were just repeating what we were listening without actually being able to digest what's the meaning of all that. So the first time that I grasped the meaning of all that, I grasped it in the words and in the work of an artist. An artist that was kind of invocating a possibility which is impossible, which is that you get adopted as a structure, as a museum, as a society, or as a system, as an art world, that you would be adopted by another system, and that other system adopting you would be a natural system and not a humanly created system. So if the rainforest adopts the museum, then in this adoption, the museum would start acting and challenging the ideas of order totally according to the new system. So in my PowerPoint, I was just having this image of Mowgli, you know, the book of the jungle, adopted by the panther and the bear. So if you can think about that in fantasy, and in fantasy it makes sense to you, it just means that it makes sense to you. So that you actually, we are able to understand these kind of impressive images of adoption that do not make sense in institutional critique terms, but it may do sense in speculative ways of understanding a more, let's call it, quantum physics-oriented idea of the praxis of art on the one hand, but also the praxis of ordering and talking and arranging our thinking around art. So then I was thinking it would be interesting, in order to do that, not to move to a country that was completely nostalgic or completely impregnated by modernity. Me coming from Spain, it was easy because Spain did not participate in the modern, but we were, because of that, completely obsessed by the modern. So by the time that we did have the first Museum of Contemporary Art operative in '96, very late, called MACBA, the first condition of the collection was to think about what is a collection of modern art in Spain different from a collection of modern art, for example, in France or in New York or in London. So, and our answer to that was that if, for example, and this is an answer that influenced many, many people, influence even the Documenta of Oakwick, influence even the Documenta of Burger without them actually knowing it. The answer that MACBA gave at the first years of its existence was a very interesting answer. The answer is that if the bourgeois culture is based on taste, and taste actually makes judgment at the core of the decision-making process and determines also the conditions of a modernity that systematizes historical transmission, but we lack the works. We cannot do a collection that has not the works of this modernity, that can actually not make judgment operative. Because imagine if you have the money to buy, I don't know, Philippe Gaston, but it's one piece that is not of any importance, for what use do you have the judgment of buying it? What is exactly the criteria and the art of history writing that you are making operative in the collection? So what are you actually doing? And when you are actually starting doing that, then this kind of prejudice of being derivative, of not being good enough, of being just in the periphery of being just like at the side of something very big, start to be, you know, super active. So what the museum did at that time was like, okay, there is taste, and there is something that it has not been explored, and it's as important as taste, and maybe be very useful at the core of building a collection. Let's call it memory. So we could actually build a collection of modern art based on remembering, and based on remembering things that modern art does not remember. So all that modern art that is not remembered by the kind of mainstream modern art or by the core modern art may be remembered by modern art again. Like, for example, collecting performance and putting in context performances that you remember and that we all know that are part of a process of dealing with objects and dealing with modernity, but also dealing with gender, dealing with the body, dealing with space, and so on and so forth. Also, another thing is like some sort of post-colonial colonialism that we started to do by remembering the modern art of other cultures, like, for example, Latin America. So the modern art of Latin America is definitely not the modern art that is collected in some of the European and Anglo-American museums, but it is modern art, and it's modernity at its best, but under different parameters. So Spain and MACBA concretely started to remember Latin American modern art as its own. So it has this kind of appropriative condition, and start building up a collection based not on the taste or not on this kind of canonical works of modern art, but in remembering things that they were forgotten from the canon but important from the canon at the same time. So, and that's why I'm saying that this highly influenced some of the documentas, because of course one of the persons that we were actually working with, even from the beginning of the museum, was Catherine David. And it was also Catherine David who influenced like what Oku was doing in rescuing photography and cinema, or what Burgel was doing by kind of entering into some sort of Deleuzian idea of an exhibition that does not highlight any of the artists but only goes piece by piece, room by room, so that you can actually not shop into the exhibition, which irritated like 90% of the collectors and 99% of the reviewers. But it's really an interesting thing. So, the question is, okay, how can you work in this idea of coexistence? How can you actually challenge not only the idea of memory, because the problem with memory is that memory only remembers the past, but memory is very bad in remembering the future. And also, how can memory be propositional? So I thought when I went to Switzerland that, in the contrary to Spain, that we were completely obsessed by not belonging to that modern process, but a country with an empire should have belonged to that process. Switzerland never wanted to belong to the modernity and actually made historical efforts over 700 years, 800 years not to be part of it. And how do you define this difference? And I was very mesmerized by the fact that while the Germans were producing objects that needed customers, the Swiss were producing substances that only needed, that don't need customers in the same way. So if you produce wash machines and cars, it's very important to taste with the customers if you like those cars and those wash machines. So the modernity and the velocity of the production of the German model, just to put a stupid example, or modernity in general, is based on an idea of production of goods that can be tested. And that's why you have biennials, because you can actually test it every certain amount of years, and you can survey what the industry is doing. And you can actually kind of materialize it in a way, and this is actually at the core of globalization. Globalization is a way of synchronizing those multiple processes of, on the one hand, producing and testing, producing and testing. But the Swiss, since the 13th century, are the owners of another kind of industry, which is alchemy, or life sciences, or medicine, or poison, as we know. So for that, they actually don't need the customer, and they don't need to test it. And that's what makes a very interesting culture. On the one hand, they are totally oriented towards internationalism, and they are immensely global. If you would call it global, I wouldn't. And on the other hand, they are completely provincial or closed in themselves. And it is that provinciality, which I call closed in themselves, at the same time being completely producing and doing from the outside, what fascinates me. So this is definitely not modern. So those guys are not synchronized. And this not being synchronized is also what makes them do this kind of non-academies or schools, where actually the most impressive thing is the practice. What you need to do is to practice art, and actually it's kind of depriving them from the discursivity and from the language that through philosophy and through, philosophy mostly, it has been coined in the French-German axis. So I thought, if I cannot remain in the Caribbean, I really want to go to this kind of case study Switzerland and see what the fuck is this, and what can we learn from it. So I ended up there, and I understood the Germans in the first month. So I understood all the prejudices of thinking why this is not working. So I'm not going to enter into details, but the fact that you have 3 people teaching at the same time is a mess. And this mess is, on the one hand, a problem, and on the one hand, it was a potentiality. So I came from MACBA, and when in Spain we were talking about, in Spain nobody is hierarchical, of course. If you ask somebody like, how is this institution structured, people would tell you, oh, there's no hierarchies here. But by not being hierarchical, you are completely powerless. It means that somebody is making a decision and you don't even know who is making that decision. So the Swiss kind of were operating in a similar thing, but it also produced an impressive collapse on my idea of quality. So how can you be relevant and produce an idea of artistic quality with this kind of structure? And that's why I started to think of, yeah, in a way, now that all of us is talking about gender and everyone is talking about challenging certain power structures and challenging certain relationships with nature and challenging certain ideas that we have with technology, how could actually an art school respond to that? So the first thing that I've been doing is restructuring these teams and making every classroom into a think tank, a very strange think tank, because it cannot be a teaching unit, so these people cannot teach. By 3 you cannot teach. So whatever you are doing is different from teaching, and this is very important to take into account. Whatever you are doing is also not supported by text, because first of all, almost none of my students read a lot, which is a problem. It's a problem that we need to face. And second of all, the idea that it's in the system about learning is based on praxis. So I thought that I needed to investigate how to build a curricula out of such a structure. So, as I was saying before to Nirit, the first thing that I needed to do was not to change anything and yet fire a couple of people. And then I started to think about who to fire and for what reasons this should be done. And then I just identified that those...
Oh, we tried that because it's
if I close? Okay, you see so this is the website that we have now. Well, this is a long story, but the thing is that what I've been doing the last 3 years is reflecting on how to produce a curriculum. I was saying who I did fire, and I did fire the art historian, which is kind of a joke, but I did it. And I fired, but I found her another job, or I kind of displaced her. But it was fundamental that to correct a mistake, and it is that 5 years ago, even before the whole idea of a new campus and a new school was totally in place, somebody thought that like the institute turning into academia could be corrected by just having academic people into it, and by identifying the art historian as the academia discourse and the kind of theory that they needed to put, and they actually had a very intelligent and very daring person to be there. But the very interesting thing is that it was not working at all. It was only creating a sense of displacement and a sense of even dividing even more this idea of praxis towards something else. So if at the beginning I was saying that we needed to produce an idea of coexistence, this idea of coexistence needs to merge with a sense of understanding, not the production of knowledge, which is a problem, because every time that we are saying and addressing the idea of a production of knowledge, we are addressing the wash machine / car problem of the Germans. So we needed to move into some substance which is less identifiable than the production of knowledge. Actually, knowledge does not get produced because it's not something that we can materialize. And if we could materialize it, because thinking, for example, is one of the most materialistic processes that you can name, what you need to actually understand before you understand knowledge is ignorance. So if you think about what it happened with Donald Trump election or what it happens surrounding any of us, one of the things that we understand less is ignorance. So to understand knowledge is quite easy in a way, if you are well educated, but even if you are very well educated, it's difficult to understand the structure of ignorance, the structure of something that defies what you know, and that defies the historical transmission of values and ideas that you think and commonsensically think that they should go farther, but they may not go farther. So by doing that, I thought that since art is a very kind of conservative substance, that on the one hand remains stable, but on the other hand is able to mutate, we need to actually face the fact that some of the biggest transformations that are or end up in art do not happen in art. So the biggest revolution, so to say, in the linguistic, in the artistic and linguistic, the art linguistically speaking transformation is happening somewhere else. And then I thought that it would be really interesting to start inviting people to deal with three families of problems or debates. One was nature, the second one was gender, and the third one, it's race. So what I've been creating is a curricula which is dealing with these debates and these questions in order to kind of educate first ourselves into the challenges and the problems of these bigger debates. Like, for example, if you challenge the experience that we have about nature, how can we stop retranslating everything into the human perception? So I start working with somebody, for example, just to be concrete, like David Gruber, which is a professor in, it's one of the explorers of National Geographic, but apart from that, works in NYU in New York. And this guy is famous because in the last 10 years, he has been developing a camera that is able to resemble or remake or rehearse the eye of fishes. So he has been doing photographic cameras and video cameras that use the eye of a turtle and the eye of a seahorse, for example. So it's a very long process. But what interests me of all these things is that these guys, in filming the nature following the logic of a fish, on the one hand, they are seeing through the camera what the fish sees through the camera or through their eyes, but also they need to retranslate it into the human eye. And what the human eye sees through the camera is completely different what the camera records. So on the one hand, we are talking about perception and the expansion of experience. On the other hand, we are talking about technology and virtual environments. And on the third hand, we are talking about in how far things connect without having like a neural center and being articulated in what I call a neuronal net of connections, where things cannot make sense argumentatively speaking. And what does it mean for artistic practice, but also what does it mean for culture, and what it means for language, and what it means for the kind of problems that we are going to face in the transformation of the social and a new contract, but also the transformation of institutions. Of course, this is not at all happening tomorrow, and these are not at all processes that are, some of them, even visible, but they are at work. And they are at work, and scientists know that they are at work, and the military knows that they are at work, and the artists know that they are at work. The artists know that they are at work because if there is a community which is really interested in expanding ideas of aesthetic experience and stop using that name of aesthetic and just challenging it and bringing it somewhere else, are the artists. The artists are actually totally invested in what is the nature of experience and what is the nature of symbiosis, and in how far, by believing in empathy and in symbiosis, we may produce a complete different social DNA, which is not based in the bourgeois idea of taste on the one hand, or in the only practice of exhibition making on the other. Both of them being impressively respectable, but probably not being what is going to happen in the next 300 years, even if, as I said, is nothing that results into a change tomorrow. So this is kind of one of the groups that we have. The second group is gender. Gender meaning everything, almost. Gender is actually not the gender or the gender-sized individuum, but our theory, or what we are speculating, is that art is gender. So that you could actually think that art in itself is an organ, it's not an object, and that that organ historically has been developed in order to acquire certain intelligence about how to experience the world in its kind of sensitive changes, and this kind of sensitive changes, you could call it gender. So this kind of genderized art is another kind of moment in our curricula. And the third moment, which is completely very difficult, and we are dealing with it still, we don't know how to deal with it, is race. So, as you know, and we know as well, we are facing an impressive moment of not knowing what and how to deal with xenophobia, but also we fail in understanding difference and in actually making things, the only thing that we kind of acquire is a language for equality, but we don't actually have a praxis for it. Since art is a praxis, we may be able to address or to crisscross these two substances of race and art. And this is, of course, something that remains to me, because I felt that the most brilliant lesson I learned from Museo del Barrio is that unless you kind of learn how to deal with race, new models, which is something that you always hear from curators, we need new models of institutions and exhibitions. These new models are not only a topological or a way of just choreographically changing certain parameters, but challenging and actually interacting in the transformation of the substance of all those which are involved into the interplay. And this is fundamental, because it's not only something that's going to affect how collections are displayed or what's the language we are going to use, but it's going to affect the very way that we perceive what we need to do. And this kind of transformation is of highly interest to me. And probably I went to India to see Tejal Shah, which was one of the artists that was included in our documenta. And after talking to her for a month, I think that another of the things that we need to include in those curricular debates is belief, even if it's another complex thing, but it's a complex thing that we also need to face. So that is more or less how we work, and I could enter into the details of how the school is articulated. We are super small. The PowerPoint is kind of not working now. It's moving. It's coming. It's coming. Now. So the website that you are seeing is a joke, because in my team you need to consensuate everything. So I thought that the last thing that you could consensuate was a website, because it was even very difficult in every of the institutions I was working with, even to just refresh the website without it collapsing. So I asked a friend of mine just to do the same as I was kind of doing, which is being the flamenco girl in front of the Swiss, and then perceiving them as the chocolate pieces. So I explained it like that to the team, and then I just put that image into the computers I'm doing now, and then I said, like, let's vote. And then they say, okay, this is your idea of radicality, and then I said, well, and then they said, you are so childish, okay, go away with it, don't worry. So now I need to change that website that has been there for 3 years, because they accepted it. And that's absolutely not very operative, but at least if you see it, you remember it. And I think that memory is really important. So we are a very small school. We are only 100 people. 60 of them are bachelor, 40 are master. And as I said, every time the bachelor are teach in groups of 20, and then these 20 people are facing 3 teachers. And then we have at least 14 technicians. The technicians don't teach, but train you. The school is not divided into media, because none of us actually, it does not come from a media division, because it's not an academy. So what I did is I made the training obligatory. So if you enter into that school and you insist that you're a painter, I put a video camera into your hands or some sort of animation program, and I make you obligatory to deal with it. And if you just take it for a walk, I don't care. But the thing is that everyone needs to pass through everything else, and then there is these workshops that everyone needs to attend just to get familiar with these kind of things. Like there is a wooden workshop, this like 3D, all this kind of amazing facilities. I just want everyone to use it, perhaps because I'm from Spain and I think that's an amazing luxury, and the Swiss don't even know that's a luxury because they have not been outside. So the bachelor is composed by a very interesting group of people. They are mostly people from the rural areas of Switzerland, and they are mostly Swiss, while the master is highly international. The bachelor is mostly rural and Swiss. because when, as I said from the beginning, when the Swiss schools were not adapting to these academic models, because they did not exist, Zurich, like some 30 years ago, when they founded the art school, they made some sort of Anglo-Saxon model, and they make a more, let's say, more professional-looking program. So if you were from a city in Switzerland, you wanted to study in the bachelor, the first priority would be to go to Zurich, because it was the school that was the most urban. It was a school that was actually touching into the ideas of the modern and so on. So all the applications before I came were from those that did not make it to Zurich, or did not make it to Lucerne, or did not make it to any of those big cities. And then I thought it was fascinating. And the second thing that I discovered is not only that everyone from, I don't know, what they call it, the inner Schweiz, like the core of the country, like the mountains, not only they were applying to our school, but also I discovered on my table a permission from the parliament to accept people without being, having done the exam to the university. I'm thinking in Spain. So if you declare that you want to study art and that you think that you can pass the interview, you could actually apply for that school even if you never went to school, to any school. So I have that kind of permission, and that made that very interesting people were actually in that interview. So by now, the whole thing kind of changed, because we have been moving to, we gain a different visibility with the new campus, with the kind of programs we are doing, with our exhibitions. So many people are applying, but I still think that is fundamental in order to investigate our relationship with a non-urban context. That for me is exactly the challenge. I think I'm calling it nature, race, and gender, but I could call it rural, and I don't call it urban. So since I don't think that the future is going to pass through the structures of the urban, which is the structures of modernity, the structures of production, industrial production, and labor, since I do think that labor is going to be transforming ways that we still don't know, one of our major challenges as, you know, cultural people is to understand how to reconnect with the non-urban. But I did have it, so I could actually just be surrounded by people that are not coming from cities. And actually that have defined the idea of Switzerland, because most of them are really poor. And I think the university is public, so you don't pay tuition, but still you need to pay living costs, and Switzerland is expensive. So you would be actually surprised by the level of, let's say, humbleness, of even poverty that some of our bachelors have. So the master is a completely different story. I thought that I actually needed to confront a new internationalism or something by trying to make a program which is completely international, but trying to fish out for students in very poor places. So instead of advertising the program very much in London or in Berlin or so on, what I'm trying is to give lectures and go to places like Delhi or Ecuador or places like that, and try to figure out if there is some donors or patrons that would help those people to come to Switzerland and use this public university for their education. So that's kind of my obsession in the last 2 years, and I've been kind of casting people for that and trying to make it interesting, because I think that is my major contribution also to the Swiss community. I think, of course, one part of the master is also Swiss or German or French, since the border is only 6 minutes away from Basel, where I am. So we have a small exhibition space, which is here. This is an exhibition by Mathilde Rossier. And this exhibition space is very small. It's only 14 by 14 meters. And I do 3 or 4 commissions a year, which are kind of contributed by foundations that are working with us. And then the other two projects that we do is that, of course, every one of the students can just apply for using the space and do exhibitions there. Or if you have a workshop and you want to make it visible for whatever reason, we really love that you use the exhibition space for making your practice more transparent, even if it's not an exhibition as such. We are starting to collaborate with different foundations, like the major one is something that we are starting with TV21, which is the Thyssen-Bornemisza Foundation in Vienna. Francesca von Thyssen, which is a patron of the arts, and she has a space in Vienna. She has been also in the last 3-4 years making oceanographic expeditions and exploring with scientists and artists the oceans, and they have an archive. So they gave us the archive so that we can study that archive and see if we can produce projects and exhibitions with it. So we are like kind of dealing with it right now. And then we are kind of starting a think tank about woman leadership in culture and the arts. So I'm quite obsessed by the idea, which is very polemic, that if you educate women equally than men, since a man is a much better man than a woman, it's probably the man who is going to make it for reasons that the woman cannot actually control, and the man is not guilty. So the question is that it may be education that may produce a difference, and that difference needs to be made in the language and in the way that you educate these two groups, not only for the sake of women, but also for the fun of men. So we are doing this new research, which is starting in September, I hope, and it's going to last for at least 5 years, which is a think tank with many people to evaluate that and to evaluate not only the state of the question of the situation of women artists and women practitioners in culture, but also the future, and be, instead of complaining, propositional about our possibilities and potentialities. This, yeah, exhibition and the rainfall. So I think that I could stop here, and then you can ask me questions, for example. What about that? One question, I like it.
I've lived in Basel for 2 years, and I'm also a Swiss citizen. I didn't really get your idea about Switzerland producing immaterial stuff, because the watch industry, for example,
yeah, it's very material.
You also know Basel World that is actually doing exactly this evaluation every year of the taste.
Yeah, I think they produce, of course, luxury items, and they're very famous for that, and watches and creams and I don't know what. Like, but basically, lots of it in Basel, as its capital, Novartis, La Roche, and so on, is based on a different industry. Of course, there is parts of the Swiss industry that needs customers, like, for example, 100% of it. But the structure of the production and the customer relationship, historically speaking, is not the same as in other European and non-European modern contexts. So it's not only their relationship with the industry, but also the relationship with the distribution of their goods, and how they see themselves as trying to produce, as you may know, as much invisibility as possible. And the production of this invisibility is a trait that is not exactly a modern trait, and is only not exactly related to banks only. So, but it's kind of at the basis of a way of relating. And I thought it was just, for me, inspiring to think about it. Not that any Swiss thought about it. I don't think that the Swiss are even aware of that. They never think about it. But for me, as a foreigner working there, it's kind of fundamental to know why certain things, why there is an allergy to excellency being embodied in personality. And of course, this is very important because I come from a culture that everything is to personality based. But it is also important that if we are going to challenge things, personality is important, but it's not everything. So on the one hand, we say, well, you know, to call an artist a genius, it's really ridiculous, but also then you call it a creative force, an innovative individual, which is a much more corporative language if you want. But at the end of the day, we go, like, we don't have another imagination of relevance, but one that is embodied in traits that you and only you have. And that's what is important to think about. Not that I know how to defy it or surpass it, but it would be interesting to keep your relevance without being an individual, as we inherit that from the 17th, 18th, and 19th century kind of individual position, and also not dissolving into some sort of marasma. I think you're not going to become a jellyfish. But yeah, I think that this is an interesting challenge.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for a very inspiring and populated paper presentation. Can you say something about ignorance? What is the structure of ignorance?
Or what?
The structure of ignorance?
Well, I don't know, but I don't know if it happened to you. But I come to the classroom very seldom because I'm a bad teacher. But I am preparing readers by default. So if you tell me to do something, I give you a reader, no? Like, that's what I've been doing, for example, with this nature thing. Since I'm obsessive and everyone in my team, but choose what do you mean by that, what is this, and da-da-da, then I end up with a 500-page reader that I compilate with Filipa Ramos, which is a curator and very good friend working with us, and then I distribute that reader. But do you think that anybody read a page of that reader? No. So, do I need to be angry at them? No. Is the structure of attention, linearity, incomprehension, transmission of knowledge is going to stay the same way as we know it? No. Do we have an alternative to think about it? No. But it has to do with some sort of new ignorance. I think about the structure of the hyperlink, or how technology jumps and kind of relates different items. It's definitely not linear in that same way. So students are doing that, and they are doing that because technology did it. And technology did not that alone. It had been doing it because it was, Barnaby Bush and other people from the beginning of the 50s. Investing not only brains but millions in producing that tool. And now we deny that tool, and that tool determines the way that we use it. And it's true, these people don't read. So what my students have in common with the village I come from is that nobody reads. So I come from complete ignorance because they were people from the villages. But they are not stupid, they are full of intelligence. So the question is how to understand an intelligence that is not passing through books. And what does it mean for the future of learning? Because definitely there is possibilities of learning. So I am hysterical, meaning I am always hysterical, but I'm even more hysterical now because I'm starting to do all kinds of things. Like the other day, for example, we were talking about the oceans, and then we have a meeting about how to present an archive. And I've been working at MACBA, and we were the most anal academic people on the planet. Archives were presented with pictures and with text, and it was the most amazing, language, and there is like no thing that you don't quote from Deleuze to Foucault to everyone that you can imagine that was smart in the 60s and 70s. But are we going to do the same? And if we do the same, for what reason? So no, I would propose not to do the same. So the question is, could you imagine a presentation of an archive that deals with notions of the ocean under no textual premises or visual premises that are illustrating what the ocean needs to do? And I was thinking, imagine that, for example, I invite 3 of the most important circus families in Switzerland, because Switzerland is not only the producer of watches and creams, fantastic creams, and chocolate and life sciences, but also the production of circuses. Why is Switzerland at the core of the 3 most famous circus families probably in the world? Because of a certain idea of rurality on the one hand and nomadism on the other. The fact that even if you go from the canton to canton, it is kind of nomadic, transferring from one thing to the other. So I thought, what if you have a circus company moving or teaching you how to move like in the ocean, so to say? So can we imagine a different symbiotic way of transferring an experience then going to something else? What is the something else? It's not text. It's going to be very difficult. I think we definitely need some sort of text, but it's not going to be structured as I give you 400 pages. So, and that's why I call the structure of ignorance. It could be the structure of that kind of choreography of situation, experiences, materials, and so on, that is not separating or denying ignorance as a negative term only. So if we were able, and we are not, to think that ignorance is a good thing, we would be able to study it or to comprehend it in a way. And one thing is to comprehend, and another thing is to understand. But to comprehend would be to actually make sense of what people feel when they don't know anything, almost, in the same way that we know. So, and I think that's probably why I'm so fascinated by the rural, or even going to places like India, because they kind of invest a little bit more than we in the West to understand those situations, and I think it's important. And it's not only important for the sake of epistemology, is really important for the sake of politics. Because I don't know about you, but I really don't like Trump. And it has to do with that. So.
Sounds like you have really academic freedom. I can't imagine here that we'll be able to be up to the degree that the municipality of the university would not approve such a curriculum.
We are too small. We are only 100. And I'm a foreigner, and I'm Spanish. And they think that if students are applying, then things are going well. I don't think anybody's actually looking that much. And they think that it sounds okay. It's very weird what we're doing. But of course, the first 2 years, they were looking at me with a very strange eyes. But since I was a foreigner, I put it like, you're looking at me with these eyes because I'm a foreigner. And then they stopped looking at me with those eyes. But it's true that they are doing, or because of this new campus, they did something that surprised themselves. So they just put me there, and it's a surprise to the system that they were not quite certain they wanted it. You know, you do something and then you discover you may not wanted it, but then it's too late. And then it actually is turning okay. But these things are not, it's not, everyone now is talking about vision. And it's not that somebody was sitting in an office having a vision. This does not exist. I don't know, if somebody tells you, don't believe it. People with a vision are not sitting in offices at all. And vision only exists through the praxis. So it's something that you practice and then it happens. But it never happened before that. So I'm an accident. But I think it's okay. And it's an accident that I am starting to love. And I was saying it to Nirit at the beginning. I really admire those that were able to put me in a system with absolutely no other person, there's no other foreigner but me. But not foreigner in passport, foreigner in the fact that they all know the same songs from childhood. That's what I call by foreigner, that they all have the same reference and not me. So the fact that they accept me, it gives me hope. Because I am falling in love. First of all, because I'm paid to fall in love with them. And second, because there is the only way of trying to make something out of it that also my team would understand as fun. And it took me, I think if it would not be for the immense drama of Museo del Barrio, where I thought that after Documenta as a curator, I could go to a place and just change it. And then you see that you cannot change anything, that the structures are unchangeable and people don't want your fantastic ideas, stick it in your ass kind of thing. Then you realize that you need then to develop methods of making it differently, that you cannot state ideas and that you actually need to challenge processes by implementing human relations that then may work or may not, but this is the only way. It's going to take much more time and it's going to be much more difficult. For example, when I came, all my colleagues, without no one being an exception, thought, why are you going to an art school after being a curator? You are going to ruin your career as a curator. And I thought, I'm not. I'm going to ruin my career as a curator if after the freedom that I enjoy at Documenta, I'm going to go to a structure that needs programming in a moment where the public money cannot allow exhibitions without the support of trustees. So how I'm going to be able to work in programming, not exhibition making, because when people are talking about curators, people think that curators are those that do exhibitions and exhibitions are free. But think about programming. Like programming means that you need to do exhibitions in a year, 2 year, 3 year, and this program needs to be perceived as something, needs to also have a funding, needs to appeal to whom, and with whom can you make it if the public money is now in a complete need of corporative and private support. So I thought, don't go there, because this is going to just frustrate the joy that you have, and that's why I went to that kind of outsider moment of Museo del Barrio, thinking that because they were outsider to the system, they will welcome my ideas, but because they were outsider to the system, they hate them double as much as anybody else, because what they wanted is to get normalized and to get standard and become MoMA, ultimately. So my idea of making them eccentrics freaked them out. So I learned a great deal with that. So it was an amazing, tragic story. And then when I thought about it, I thought, I need to go to a backstage, and I need to produce a backstage somehow. And I thought that an institute of 100 people may be it. And that's why I think that I can contribute in trying to understand what people that are not famous are doing. Because when I was asked, the second question not only was, you are ruining your curatorial career, but who is famous in your institute? And I couldn't say a name, because nobody is famous. I think I'm not teaching with Rosemary Trockel or anybody. None of the teachers I have are famous. So to learn how their non-famousness is a very relevant position in the art and the practice, and to kind of put myself into their position, instead of superimposing, I don't know whom, super famous on top of them, like chocolate to a cake, was like the most difficult task I ever did. So I don't think that, the first impulse is to kill them, to try to get rid of them, fire them, put fire into the school, like just, all sorts of violent fantasies of just being able to call all my friends and have my life super easy. But because this is not possible, then you need to try to come up with a true imagination of what it is to coexist with people that you don't even agree in the description of the weather. So can you do that? And then if the answer is yes, then it is an important moment. So now the answer is starting to get into a yes. And I love it, because we were super clear. For them, I was like, a swarf coming from a Spanish garden and making their life impossible. And for me, it was a nightmare. Because if you were talking about, I don't know what, of a program in an idealistic term, they were not understanding a word of what I was talking about, because they never did it and they were not interested. So to move that rock was, for me, it's amazing. So, of course, I have not done it alone. I was I follow another method, but I have not. I did not put my personal hands into that, but it happened. So.
I have a not very sophisticated question. It seems to be a lot of luck in your story. I mean, you began the whole story about your career with being a chief curator of the MACBA, and for some of us, that's already like a victory. How did you pave your way into that position?
That was miedo. Like, was really bad. No, it was not luck. No, well, of course, I think everything is a question of luck, it's a question of work as well. I was in the Kunstverein. Going to MACBA was one of the best and the worst things I did, I think. I was a great admirer of that museum, and I admire structure so much, because when I was a student, I really recognized that it was a group of people, very valid, trying to make sense of conditions that they were not equivalent to conditions in other countries, and I was very proud of learning their exhibition. I think it was really kind of, I thought, wow, we can contribute. This idea that, we can get educated to a point that we can find our own language, that we can expose material in our own terms, and so on and so forth. And then I was in Germany working, and they picked me up, and because just randomly. So you need to understand my country, because I went to Germany. They just, when the new director was appointed, they just pick up the one that's outside, because the one that's outside is better than the one inside. It's called pure provincialism. So this person just picked me up. We are not Googling anything. And I went back because I thought it was kind of an honor. So our relationship was based on a misunderstanding, and that also is very important. So from the outside, all these situations are perceived as very lucky, and they are, because they are lucky, because everything that gives you the opportunity of thinking is lucky. But it was misery, and I learned so much, because I never worked in Spain before. I worked, I studied a little bit, then I studied outside, then I started working in the Basque Country, but I have the most marvelous boss, a woman ever, and it was the first time that I was working in Spain under a man, and it was a disaster. I must say it. I think it was a disaster in all terms. I really love to be in that museum because the staff is amazing, but the structure of our society is brutal. It's really sexist to the core without anybody recognizing it. So in the outside, we are doing exhibitions that are positioning female and values about transformation of the social. In the inside, we are working like in the Middle Ages with a team, where nobody can actually propose anything, or for example, there is no curators in our museums because there is the director and the chief curator, and the rest are exhibition coordinators by the number of 23. And when you say, like, but at least they could be assistant curators, they say no, because if they are assistant curators, they are going to ask for more money. So no. So this is the level of luck. So I thought it was like very interesting, but horrendous at the same time. And yeah, and I suppose that you learn a lot from these kind of things. But yeah, I think are circumstances, and what you are naming is a luck which is based on a prejudice. The prejudice that anybody studying abroad has better chances to get a job inside. And that's why they gave it to me. I think I really not because of my merit.
Chus, you actually answered my question before the lecture, but I wanted to ask if you can reflect about the mega exhibitions, that you were part of that play, both in the Documenta and the Venice Biennale, and you are also an advisor for a lot of like really groundbreaking exhibitions or big exhibitions, mega exhibitions. And now, as you talk about the rural, being on the other side of the coin, for instance, can you say something about the really?
But I think that all this, meaning it really depends, because biennials are one thing, Documenta are another. Biennials are a completely different. Let's put it that way, biennials, which I really kind of was always very skeptical. Now I'm thinking the contrary. I think, oh, biennials are great. And then before I was saying biennials are I'm skeptical because it's this kind of positioning and surveying artists every 2 years, But actually I was lazy, and I never thought that biennials are very important in order to kind of restitute a ritual of paganism, of the festival. So in order now that our public space is in a complete danger for many reasons, it would be interesting to refound or to regain the joy of the pagan festival. So biennials are much less accurate. So in biennials you produce things that you may not even think that they are great. And you produce them for circumstances, and you don't even think that they can stay. And exactly this kind of being inaccurate or doing it for the sake of implementing and reverberating certain traits of the popular in the public space, they may be actually more relevant than ever. On the other hand, the public money does not want biennials, and nobody needs to position itself in the same way as 15 years ago through a biennial, because nobody is actually caring. And they don't care because the wave of populism and right-wing actually don't place any symbolic value into it. So yes, I do think that they are being transformed, and the fact that we hear less about them makes me much more interested in them. And Documenta is a complete different situation because it's every 5 years. And Venice, for me, it's important. Like I was talking to Francesca about it. Like Francesca von Thyssen just is gonna open an ocean pavilion, and she's gonna do it like her thinking was kind of intuitive. But I thought that was so important, because I've been always criticizing the fact that these kind of historical biennials are based on nation-based or nation identity, and it's the same as the MACBA contradiction. On the one hand, you say that you surpass it; on the other, you just establish it or you restate it. So how to do it? And I think that somebody is having an ocean pavilion is really interesting as a proposal. And if you just would float a little bit those historical structures with some absurdity, needed absurdity of these other substances, then we would learn something, because otherwise you cannot learn. You just perpetuate structures, and we know all about it. We all know what it means to get represented or to represent in Venice. That we know. So we can only learn if we learn something else. So.
Following your answer to my question, now I understood your point. Do you think this way of invisibility in corporations, in Swiss corporations, it's also related to the invisibility in Swiss politics, and the fact that the democracy there is not personal nationality-based, but I don't know how to call it.
Referendum.
Yeah, referendum, but also substance-based. I mean, it's word-based, law-based, like sentence-based, and not people-based.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for those who are not Swiss, but it's also the fact that they are not modern. They are not based on representative democracy. Representative democracy means the kind of swift, like the deposit of power into you. So you represent me, to represent us into a parliament. So the Swiss don't use that model. They have a parliament and so on, but actually there is many filters and referendums that go through the basis, which with many problems, but it is something very interesting, the whole process of how they do it. And I'm learning a lot. I think I still don't get it, and that's why we're starting a series of people, of inviting people to explain Swiss democracy to us. Meaning even to the Swiss, because the Swiss do it, but they don't also understand it, because they are just voting in a certain way. I cannot vote, on the one hand, it's also funny. Like, I am, not even if I stay there for, I think,
10 years.
no, 11 years is to become a citizen, but
Yes.
but not even then. I think, yeah, after you become a citizen, you cannot vote.
Right.
But there is some sort of a strange ecology on preventing this, because the way they do it is also ultra complex. So every one of us, if we constitute a petition, we can make that petition into a vote, and then many things can. And I was very surprised. For example, EcoPop. So it was a guy that thought that we need to restrict, they need to restrict the entrance of foreigners. Switzerland is the country in Europe with the largest amount of foreigners, but still they have like 35% of the population are foreigners. So one part of the kind of right wing made a petition of restricting the entrance of the foreigners, not based on race or prejudice or the fact that they should not be, but based on ecology. Because if so many people, others than the ones here, they should actually not, you know, this is like ecologically is not good. So the whole thing was so twisted, perverse, and interesting. It produced the most impressive debate ever. And I was talking to a friend that we invited him, which I recommend. I don't know if he has anything in English, but it's called Milo Rauch, and he's doing theater, and he does realistic theater. And Milo was analyzing, do you remember that Breivik, that guy that killed around 85 people in Ostoja, in that island outside Norway, outside Oslo? When he was asked to defend, to pick up a lawyer in the court, he decided not to pick up a lawyer and to defend himself, and then he wrote a letter in his defense, and this letter has been banned, it's not public, which is kind of unconstitutional because this material should be public. And he found that letter, and that letter he was claiming that one of the problems is that Norwegian male are in a danger of extinction, and that Norway should not be considered under the point of view of a nation, but under the possibility of a natural reserve for those which are the Norwegian male, and like men and women. So that EcoPop was kind of resonating with that, but this is kind of the same Trump arguments with the idea of identity politics in reverse for the white male in America. So, and it's very interesting because this absurdum of realism is kind of, you know, it's kind of even challenging ideas of nation state. I think you're not defending Norway as a country, you're defending Norway as a reserve, like as the ones existing for minorities. And that's really kind of twisted and interesting to look at. So this kind of proposition got completely debated, and I think it was, of course, denied, but this you would not see, for example, in Spain or in France, because these petitions would never reach the level of being worth to ask. Because in our representative democracy, there is many things that are paternalistic towards us. It's not worth asking us. But then it happened what it happened in the American election. And by the time that you ask them, they may turn all in one. So it's an interesting layers and layers of being permanently asked about the same question that affects your society in 20,000 forms. Because first it was a petition before about the restriction of foreigners. It was denied. then it was this echo pop. So every time you have been asked the same. Would you prefer foreigners not to come to Switzerland? But instead of asking that once, since it's denied, you need to invent ways of asking it to you again 40 times. And that's exactly, for me, it's becoming super interesting. Because perhaps we need to be asked 40 times and to test what is the time that we would just get weak. Or what's the form of the question that we would find more acceptable? Because that's exactly what it is. They are molding the question to your answer.
Yeah.
So,
thank you very much.